Alright, to continue on with our previous installment, we're going to talk about how, well, you may have already possibly recognized this, how V for Vendetta, right up here, this is in a 3 DVD Blu-ray collection with Watchmen and Constantine, but V for Vendetta up here and back there, if I can point at him, it somehow ended up like the Phantom of the Opera, which, first of all, we need to point out the fact they are both distributed by Warner Brothers, and I'm sure anyone who's seen V for Vendetta can kind of, get the Phantom of the Opera connections to it right off the bat. I mean, there's literally a section to it dedicated on this Wikipedia page. Let me flip to it. There's really a small paragraph on its Wikipedia page that says, as noted by several critics and commentators, the film's story and style mirrors elements from Gaston Leroux's Phantom of the Opera. V and Eric both wear masks to hide their disfigurements, control others through leverage of their imaginations, have tragic pasts, and are motivated by revenge. So, I'm glad it was a popular enough observation that it got talked about on the Wikipedia page. But I'm actually, the more that I have looked at this movie, the more interested I have become in the why of it all, and how. Okay, let me first give a little backstory. When I first watched V for Vendetta, I had no idea that it was going to be like Phantom. I had read a review about it when my mom's movie magazines back here for our Dark Realms, if anyone's heard of that. And I was very intrigued by the premise, but I had no thoughts in my mind that had anything to do with Phantom. So imagine my shock when I actually sat down to watch it after my intrigue was further pushed by the CinemaSins video way back when in 2015, and I saw all the Phantominess written all over it. I was just like, oh my god, is this a Phantom movie? Throw in the fact that it was made by the people who made The Matrix, and I was like, oh my god, this is the greatest movie ever! Mind you, I was 15, so to see what I consider to be two pretty separated fandoms, I guess I'll just use that word, even though I wasn't really familiar with the word as much. But to see that my dad had introduced me to The Matrix and my mom had introduced me to Phantom of the Opera, to see that they had somehow come together to make this really awesome movie, I legitimately thought it was the greatest thing ever, and I kind of made that part of my personality for a good part of my sophomore year. Fun times. I even wrote a list of all of its Phantom of the Opera similarities that I could pick up on way back when, which unfortunately I can't find, so... But, anywho, since in recent years, I've fallen back in love with it, I've done more research on it to go why is it more like Phantom of the Opera? And turns out, well, it really wasn't originally. I found someone was good enough to upload the original screenplay of V for Vendetta onto not YouTube, but onto the internet, and then I read through a lot of it. I was like, oh my god. It's actually, the original screenplay, as written by the Wachowskis sisters, was a lot closer to the graphic novel than the movie itself ended up being. So I'm very curious as to how that changed. I mean, here's some of the most notable differences that I picked up on. First of all, the movie definitely seemed to lean far more into the romance angle of V and Evie than the screenplay did. I mean, this was Evie's opening quote about V. For in the plot we find more than a man. We find the idea of that man, the spirit of that man, and that is what we must never forget. But in the film, she says, but what of the man? We are told to remember the idea and not the man. But you cannot kiss an idea, cannot touch it or hold it. Ideas do not bleed. They do not feel pain. They do not love. And it is not an idea that I miss. It is a man I shall never forget, which I did paraphrase some of that because cut it down for time. So there's definitely a far more of the movie focuses far more on the man behind the idea, as opposed to the original screenplay was more the idea that was presented by the man. So I thought that was really interesting. I mean, and then at the end of the movie, she literally says, "No one will ever forget that night and what it meant for this country, but I will never forget the man and what he meant to me." So, you know. But that's not only that. That seems a bit superficial. I go, well, why do you think that's it? Well, I mean, there's more Phantom in here to go around. It's not just that. These are some big ones that I really have to mention. For example, the Violet Carsons, the flowers that V gives out in the film, they were changed from the graphic novel. In the graphic novel, he gives out Violet Carsons, which are apparently named after the actress. But in the movie, they were changed to Scarlet Carsons, which I think on that front you could probably argue was more of an aesthetic choice, because the film does have a huge color scheme of red, black, and white going on. But I don't know. I mean, considering the fact that there's always a red rose in the logo of Phantom of the Opera, and the 2004 film kind of expanded on that concept by having Gerard Butler leave these red roses with black ribbons on them throughout the movie. Iconic choice, by the way. Seems pretty fitting! But we're not done yet. The inclusion of Gordon Dietrich. Gordon Dietrich was not a character in the original screenplay. There are a bunch of these other characters from the graphic novel who were included. Derek and Rosemary Almond, Conrad and Helen Heyer, Harper Lout, etc., etc. And Gordon Dietrich was cut out. But at the end of the day, all these other characters are taken out, and Gordon Dietrich was included. And he more or less serves as the Raoul of the movie, given the fact that he's not only the person Evie goes running to after she escapes from V's underground lair, but there's also a very similar story setup of how Evie first meets V when she's supposed to go out on a date with Gordon, just as how Christine first has her physical encounter with Eric after she's invited to go out with Raoul. So basically these movies have taught me, if you get asked out by a fancy rich guy, but then that gets infiltrated by a mysterious hot masked guy who offers out his hand to you, you take it. It might just change your life. Having sexy voices doesn't hurt either, but we'll get there. But that's not even the most shocking part. The Chancellor Sutler. That's not his name. His name is Adam Susan. I was like, what? Because, as a teenage girl, I thought it was kind of funny going, haha, his name is Sutler. Kind of sounds like Butler. LOL. Turns out that might actually not be as big of a funny haha as I thought it was. Because there's no way. Why would they change his name? Keep in mind, a lot of characters in this film, from my research, are different or have slightly different arcs than they have in the graphic novel. But their names are still the same. Evie, Finch, Creedy, blah, 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 Dietrich. But they changed the Chancellor's name, which, I'm not gonna lie, Adam Sutler does kind of roll off the tongue easier. But why? Why did they change his name to Sutler? Oh my god. It makes me even more so of the belief that I think the Wachowskis were probably approached by Warner Brothers, who distributed the 2004 Joel Schumacher Phantom movie, saw what they were doing when they gave them the green light to do V for Vendetta, which, by the way, they had aspirations to do even before they made The Matrix. Fun fact. And they just said, hey, we see what you're doing here with all this little, girl hanging out with a spooky masked man. I think I could make that a little more Phantom of the Opera. And I'm not going to say it wasn't actually not already in the screenplay. We'll get to that in a minute. But I'm very much of the belief now that they were just like, damn it, Wachowskis, this is not the time to be subtle. We are trying to feed off all the fangirls that we are going to inevitably create out of the 2004 movie. Speaking from experience here. But here's what I think is interesting. But there's this little piece, but getting back to what I said earlier, there's this little piece from the screenplay where there's I drew a comparison to how V is described when he goes to kill Father Lilliman compared to how he goes to kill Delia Surridge. As he approaches the church to take out Lilliman, they wrote, "A shadow begins moving across the manicured grounds, borne on a thick mist like a dark phantom." No, I am not making that up. It's directly a line from the screenplay. And this is Delia Surridge. That scene. V floats on the edge of the room's shadows, a dark angel. I did not make either of those lines up. Those were in the screenplay. And I was like, oh my god. And then I thought about it even more thought a little deeper, and I went, oh my god. Dude, that's genius. Because I immediately started thinking the line where she goes, "Angel or father, friend or phantom, who is it there stirring?" And I was like, whoa. I mean, I don't know if they thought that deeply, but I love the idea of the violence and the vengeance behind the death of Father Lilliman, using that to describe V as a dark phantom. But then with Delia, he's far more sympathetic. He's far more merciful, and then refer to him as a dark angel. Not to mention the fact that the setup of the scene with Delia in bed and V at the back of the room feels very Death and the Maiden, but that's something else. That's just me. But I was like, wow. So, yeah, I have a very strong feeling. I think Warner Brothers stepped in here and told them to make it far more explicit. Straight up to the point of having Natalie Portman and Hugo Weaving doing these straight up Phantom-esque poses for their freaking photo shoot where they're just like this. Where she's just leaning into his arm like this and he's holding his arm, and I'm like, oh my, I was like, not them doing the Jerry Emmy posing, oh my god! Because I'm not sure if you can see it. Ugh. But yeah, it's just gonna look weird. It's kind of backwards, but yeah. Hugo and Natalie essentially pose in a very similar manner to this. You can look it up. Oh, jeez. But speaking of Hugo, well, oh, shit. Obviously, there's there's a very famous story of how Hugo Weaving was not the original first choice for V, which, if you've seen the movie, definitely hard to believe the first time you watch, because, holy shit, it was like he was made for this role. He owns it, 100%. But yes, so there's the fact that James Purefoy, who I know best from Solomon Kane and A Knight's Tale, in that order, was the original casting choice for V, but for whatever reason that is still kind of murky even now, he left at the beginning of the production. And I'm sorry, but is it bad that I kind of can't help but keep imagining him leaving the set going, "Now you see! Bye-bye, I'm really leaving!" I'm sorry. Too many years watching Phantom 4, but it's just a funny image. Funny mental image. If you got the reference, good for you. But yes. So I've been doing research on when the Phantom of the Opera and V for Vendetta had their own little crossover fandom way back when on YouTube in the early years. You can find the playlist on my channel if you want to get a little sneak peek of that. And, well, it kind of came to my attention that they are similar looking people. And by that I don't just mean V and Phantom, I mean Hugo Weaving and Gerard Butler. Apparently they are very similarly featured people, which I did not need to know, but okay. I mean, there was literally a crossover fanfiction that pointed that out. And I just gotta read you the quote where, from Evie's perspective, who's married to him in the fanfic, she meets Phantom and she just goes, "The man before her was at least V's height, 6'2" or taller with a defined muscular frame. Long dark hair pulled back into a ponytail framed a half-masked face, with soft sensual lips that curled into a slight smile. Was this man a relative of V's? Had he found someone from his family? Evie wondered. They could as hell pass for each other. The only difference was the mask and the clothes. Evie looked over at the masked figure beside her. V, are you two related? I can't believe I just quoted a fanfiction, but reading that line just made me go, hey, what? I'm sorry. Well, from some Google searches, I'm not really gonna get into, I found out they're both apparently 6'2" brunette blue-eyed men with very attractive baritone singing voices. And I was like, yo, you gotta be kidding me! I was like, and again, remember, if you watched my last video, Gerard Butler was not the first choice for Phantom either. So I'm just like, how does that even happen? What? How does that friggin' happen? Oh my god. Ooh. I'm sure somebody's probably watching this going, hey, I want to follow up on that baritone singing voice. How do you know that? Again, another matter of the Phantom and V show by Z Shadow that I amassed in a playlist. Found out Hugo could sing along the way, and it turns out it appealed to me in the same way Gerard Butler did when I was a preteen. Yay! And it's because they have the same vocal range. I wanted to die. Oh, jeez. Years of Phantom will do that to you. But yeah, it's pretty freaking funny. I mean, I even found this unintentional crossover parallel mention where I found this, concept of something called Scream Sheet. They said, oh, what would happen if V for Vendetta and Phantom of the Opera got into a fight? And this is what they wrote. They said, perhaps they've always been natural enemies, just like Dracula and the Wolfman. And I was like, are you kidding me? Because for those of you who don't know, Hugo Weaving was in the 2010 Wolfman movie. Not as the titular Wolfman, unfortunately, but as Inspector Aberline. I was like, oh my god! And well, with Gerard Butler as Dracula, I guess it would work. Neither movie was received very well by critics, so woohoo! They got that coming too. But I was like, oh my god, the jokes just keep writing themselves. What the frick? So yeah, that's like a final little nail in the coffin. It's really interesting how V was actually originally supposed to be released on November 5th, 2005, which again, for murky reasons, was pushed back to March 17th, 2006. But they were going to release this less than a year after the Schumacher Phantom movie, which had come out on December 22nd, 2004. So that's very interesting to me. I go, yep, they really wanted to appeal to the Phantom crowd with this film. And needless to say, I mean, they were pretty successful about that. I know a lot of Phantom people who really like V. So, and again, there's a whole YouTube series about these two characters going on funky little adventures in Microsoft Windows Paint that you can watch on my channel that I amassed from a little Phantom deep dive I did last year. So, I don't know. And for the longest time, that's where I thought it ended. I thought V was like Phantom. I appreciated the Wachowskis' contribution to my fandom, my first fandom, and my most beloved. And I thought that's where it ended. Until 2021. Yeah. We're going to get to that in a minute. Stay tuned. Ugh.